Welcome to CEWT Talk. This broadcast is brought to you by the Continuing Education Workforce Training Division of Idaho State University's College of Technology. This podcast is part of our continuing outreach efforts, and the format is conversational. We will be having conversations with businesses, professionals, entrepreneurs, community agencies, and, in all cases, difference makers. Now, let's get started with CEWT Talk.
Welcome everyone to the CEWT podcast. Thanks for joining. My name is Raylynn Price. I'm the Health Programs Coordinator for Idaho State University's Continuing Education Workforce Training, or CEWT for short. Joining us today is Chad Bannister. He's the Bannock County Deputy Sheriff. He currently serves as the law enforcement representative with the Region 6 Behavioral Health Board, is a part owner in a small training center for student and adult athletes, and has recently partnered in a not-for-profit called Resilience to work with kids and adults in crisis and recovery. We will be talking with Chad about his not-for-profit Resilience. Our format will be conversational and focus on our topic and guests for 20 minutes. In fact, the clock started with the welcome, and after 20 minutes, no matter where we are in the conversation, we are done, and we will wrap it up. So, hello, Chad, and welcome to CEWT Talk.
Thank you.
Several years ago, you were in the construction business,
Yeah.
and now you are in law enforcement and involved in Resilience. So please tell us a little bit about this journey and how you ultimately became involved with Resilience.
So I guess it's a good thing you gave me a 20-minute warning. That's the way I look at it, as that was my 20-minute warning. I guess my journey actually started when I was in the construction business, when the economy tanked back in 2008, 2009, 2010, right? I was sitting on several homes like a lot of people, and I lost my home, lost my cars. We started over, hit the reset button. That put me in a really bad place for my mental health for several years, and really struggled with it. I didn't know what was going on at the time. I didn't know anything about mental health. I didn't know anything about any of that stuff. But that's kind of where my journey began. That journey ultimately led me to becoming a law enforcement officer. I became a law enforcement officer after I gave up trying to be a real estate mogul and a construction magnate, which was my goal, and retired by the age of 55, right? So when I became a law enforcement officer, it was really my first introduction to actually getting to know the people who are addicted and who are in recovery in a different way. I have family members who've struggled with that, in-laws who have struggled with that, and never really understood where they come from and why they did the things that they did. In becoming a law enforcement officer, I was given the opportunity a couple of years ago to become a school resource officer for Marsh Valley High School District. And to say that changed my life would be an understatement. It literally has completely changed the direction of the next, 25, 35 years, however many more years I get to spend on this earth. Because when I started working with these kids down there, and there's always the group of kids. Marsh Valley School District does not have an alternative education system. So when kids get in trouble, they stay in the school system down there. Most of these kids are on IEPs and special education decrees. A lot of their behaviors are a result of their IEPs and their special education decrees, and so they cannot be removed from school for them. So we had some problems down there, and I took it upon myself to try and figure out how to help with that. And in talking with, we're very fortunate here in Bannock County, talking with Judge Murray and some of the local probation officers. Judge Murray's very forward-thinking in childhood trauma and stress. So we were able to start looking down that road to get some help for the teachers in Marsh Valley who were struggling and dealing with some of these students who are coming in on a regular basis.
Trying to find solutions to a very real problem.
Absolutely. So I guess my journey and how I found out about this stuff was about just about 2 years ago. I went to Idaho Juvenile Justice Conference. There, all of the speakers seemed to have an underlying theme. Didn't matter whether I was going to a talk on addiction or whether it was a talk on human trafficking. Everybody was talking about adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And when I left there, I thought, well, there's something to this, and I need to look into it more. But not only that, while I was there, a couple of the speakers, every time they would start talking about these conditions and the things that are caused from adverse childhood experiences and childhood trauma, all of my kids kept popping into my head. I went, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. And I could absolutely, I started to get a clear picture as to what was going on. And I'm like, okay, there's a reason for this. If there's a reason for this, we probably have some understanding better on how to fix this stuff. And there's probably some training that we can do. So that started my deep dive into this. In doing so, in sitting in that conference, it became very personal to me, not only for the kids that we were that I was involved with down in Marsh Valley, but on the home front. Because the first time, for those who are familiar, probably jumping way ahead on things here, but
so, jump wherever you need to go.
Gotcha. So let me just, it became personal to me because I found out that my wife, I knew she was, I've known my wife's literally my entire life, and she is a 9 out of 10 on the ACEs assessment, and I'm going to explain to you what that means really quick. So back in 1994, a psychologist and a medical doctor, Dr. Robert Anda and Vincent Felitti, put together what was called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. Was a landmark study that has, I honestly know that it will change the way that we actually work in the medical field and everything in the future. It's already starting to, because it's going to change the way that we treat people. Instead of starting with physiological responses, we're going to start with what's going on in the brain and that's causing these physiological responses. Psychosomatic manifestations of brain maladies is what we're seeing for the most part today. And when I talk to my friends who are doctors, they completely concur. So what happened in '94 was a little background on Anda and Felitti. One of them, like I said, was a psychiatrist. At the time, a psychology textbook actually said that sexual molestation and rape was exceedingly rare, happening possibly in 1 in a million cases, which at the time would have meant that there would have only been about a few hundred cases in the United States of America. And this is in the early 70s. This is what's being taught in psychiatry to people who are becoming psychiatrists. Well, he knew that this was wrong because he's like, if this is the case, then I have every single one of those people in my practice. Yeah. And so, but to say otherwise was heresy at the time, right? And so he knew that there was something else that was going on with the people that he was seeing in his office, regardless whether it was depression, anxiety, suicidality that he was dealing with. Vincent Felitti was running a weight loss program. He was working with mostly women who were extremely overweight, 200 to 300 pounds overweight, incredibly successful as a physical trainer, or as a trainer. The idea of helping somebody lose 300 pounds in 53 weeks is incomprehensible. Okay, but these are the kinds of things that he was doing. However, what he was finding out was that a lot of times these people were dropping out of the program in very high numbers and gaining the weight back 300 pounds, 250 to 300 pounds, in less time than they lost it. He knew that something was going on. He accidentally asked a question incorrectly one day in his practice when he was doing follow-up studies with some of the people who had dropped out. And he incorrectly asked one of the ladies I can't remember what the question he was supposed to ask was, but he incorrectly asked them, when was your first sexual experience? And when she said 3 years old, he thought, I asked that incorrectly, she heard it incorrectly. So he just kind of skipped over it. And at the end of it, he came back to it and asked it again, got the same answer. And he thought, okay, what's going on here? So next person, what do you think he did? Asked the same question. Well, he found out that almost every single one of the women who were in his obesity clinic had some form of sexual molestation growing up. And so this, of course, he started putting together, studies and papers and writing on this, and his samples weren't large enough, and he started to speak at medical conference, and he was ostracized by the medical community at the time. But Anda and Felidi, fortunately, were sitting in the audience listening to one another at one point and got together, which put them together with the Centers of Disease Control in Kaiser Permanente in Southern California. So Kaiser Permanente is one of the largest health maintenance organizations in the country. On an annual basis, they would screen about 50,000 people with a health questionnaire. Centers for Disease Control was interested in the health outcomes aspect of what Anda and Felidi were looking at. So Anda and Felidi spent 2 years putting together a questionnaire to add to this health questionnaire, right? So there were 10 questions that they ultimately came up to score abuse and neglect, right? So they asked 25,000 people in 1994 to participate in this study. 17,300 and some odd people ended up participating, answering the extra 10 questions, right? What happened next was nothing short of transformational. Dr. Anda said that when he read the findings at the end of the study, he literally fell to his knees sobbing because of what he saw. So when they started to look at the health outcomes, so this is the scope of the people who answered this question. This is in Southern California, so immediately think, okay, well, we're probably going to have a lot of low-income people who are going to be involved in this assessment. Okay, well, no, this is Kaiser Permanente. These are people who have health insurance, right? So this was 80%, the demographic was 80% white, 74% college educated, right? 40 to 55-year-olds. And so this is the upper middle class and the upper class. This is not the poor in San Francisco and inner city LA. Okay, this is the upper class in San Diego. As soon as they answered yes to one of the questions, okay, some of the questions were, about abandonment. If you had a parent who was arrested, or if there was a divorce, or any died, abuse and neglect questions. You have to worry about where your food came from. Did you have to worry about wearing torn clothing to school? If you're going to have a roof over your head, did you have a parent who is an alcoholic or a drug addict or mental health problems, right? So these are the 10 questions, and it was all based on honor before your 18th birthday. Now these people are 50 to 65 years old now, right? Or 40 to 55. So at this point, 67% answered yes to at least one of these questions. Okay, so now these are people, excuse me. Take a breath. These are people who, I look at it as like a cross-section of Pocatello, Idaho, and anytime that this assessment has been repeated anywhere in the world, even in other countries, the demographic has been very similar, and the outcomes have been almost the same. 67% can answer yes to at least one question, right? So, but as soon as you answer yes to one question, the odds that there's another one is going to go up, because if you live in a house with an alcoholic, probably going to have some kind of physical abuse, right? You're probably going to have some other forms of neglect. Good chance that you're going to have somebody end up in the family going to jail or leaving, right? And so you start to see a pretty quick increase. So when they started going back and extrapolating the information health-wise out of this, they started noticing the immense poor health outcomes. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease with one ACE went up like 1.7 times. With 4 or more, 380%.
That's incredible.
So, yeah. Ischemic heart disease, number one killer in the country now. Actually, I think heroin's overtaken that now. But but 540% increase with a 4 or more ACE score, right? And so then they thought, well, people who are involved, who live in houses with drug addiction and all this other stuff, obviously they're probably going to be more apt to take on risky behaviors, right? So, so they went back and they modified for these risky behaviors, and guess what they found out? It only attenuated 50% of the score. So whether or not you took part in the risky behaviors, you still had a 50% greater chance of having the same health outcomes. So what was going on there? This isn't something that is just like, it probably just happens. Yeah, absolutely.
Risky behavior, like for heart disease, there's a list of risky diseases. Is this what it's talking
So
about?
we're talking about smoking, drinking.
Sure, right. So
Yeah.
even if you didn't engage in those kind of at-risk behaviors for that, you still had, would you say,
50%. It only attenuated the risk by 50%. It cut it in half. So instead of 580% with a score of 4, now you're at what would that be? 250 plus 20, 270. Okay.
Incredible statistics, isn't it?
Yeah,
okay.
it's so you can see why this stuff is just. When I started to look at this originally, I just was like, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. And then they started looking at things like unexplained pain, like fibromyalgia, and this is, fibromyalgia. You talk to most medical practitioners, will tell you it doesn't really exist. It's a psychosomatic manifestation. There's no such thing as fibromyalgia. Well, there is, because it's neural networks in the brain that are telling you have pain in your body, just like an amputee is going to have pain in an arm that is not there, right? Same exact things going on. Like I said, my wife's a 9 out of 10. My wife's been suffering with severe abdominal pain for over 2 years now, and had several medical procedures. We could not figure out what was going on. And then I go to the Idaho Juvenile Justice Conference Center, and I'm like,
there you go.
My wife's a 9 out of 10, unexplained pain. What is going on? So, obviously I bring this up to our doctor, and he's like, absolutely. And he said, that's exactly what I think's going on. He said, if you remember our last visit, he said, I told you if, the next procedure doesn't work, we're going to have to go a little higher. I was not talking about her heart or her neck. I was talking about her brain. Mm-hmm. And so, fortunately, we do have, some medical staff who understand this stuff. And if you'd like to do some quick research on this stuff, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris out of San Francisco, California, is phenomenal. She has some incredible YouTube talks. Her book, The Deepest Well, is foundational. She's one of the leading researchers in the genetic and epigenetic structure of childhood trauma, and she has changed the outcome for tens of thousands of kids' lives in Southern California by bringing into her practice. She actually has mental health practitioners in her medical practice, and that's her first line of defense. When you go into Nadine Burke-Harris's office, you're actually given a mental health screening first.
That's going to be a game changer.
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely.
When they start to fall into place.
It's no question, because if we have health outcomes like this, and so when you go back and look at the health outcomes, it's actually it's anywhere from 50 to 70% of the health problems that we have in the United States can actually be traced back to adverse childhood experiences and trauma and developmental problems, right? So a lot of people think, a lot of kids, they're too young to even understand what's going on. It's a good thing this happened when they were young, so that they don't know what's going on.
So it doesn't affect them as they get older, right?
And it's absolutely so untrue, because it's 10 times worse in the early developmental stages. They even in the womb. I mean, when a child is in its mother's womb and a mother is being beaten or under constant stress or duress, when a mother's cortisol levels and adrenaline levels are constantly going through the roof, you think they're not coursing through the infant's system and affecting the development of the brain, which is literally now, dividing, on a daily basis with new neural networks that it's creating in the womb. So these problems start.
Oh my goodness, that was way too fast.
No way. Oh.
Well,
That's all right.
let's do some make an executive call here.
Okay.
Do the close, Raylan,
Okay.
but put a little teaser on there at the end of the close. If they hang around, we gotta get.
Yeah, sorry. I apologize.
Oh, this was
No, it was
Gosh, dang.
fascinating.
information.
We were like,
and then
like glue.
definitely plug in that.
Oh.
It's gonna be a speaker.
Yeah, I was just about to say, where are we? About 10 minutes? No, that's
I
I
know.
know. So if you don't mind,
Okay.
just do the close. And
Okay.
What we'll do is we'll put an Easter egg on the back.
all right.
Okay, so tell me again what I'm doing.
Just close the podcast.
It's the event.
Oh
Pitch
my
to me.
gosh, but I want to know more about this.
Right? Leave them wanting more, right?
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
Yeah, I just pitched the event.
Okay, so wow, that went so fast.
Yeah,
Our time
crazy.
is up, and I so appreciate you coming
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
talk to us today, Chad. Now, Chad will be speaking with us at our Mental Health Resource Fair on October 12th, and I personally cannot wait to see what he's going to talk about now with the resilience.
Yeah.
Along with
No, we
this,
did not get
with
into
the
resilience, but yeah,
ACEs,
it's incredibly important.
But there's a lot of information, and it is a game changer. It's
Absolutely.
just fantastic.
Chad, give us your contact info if somebody wants to reach out to you.
So you reach out to us on Facebook, BA2 Athlete Training. If you message us on Facebook, we'll get back to you within a couple of minutes, and we would love to talk to you about what we do and how we're helping people with these issues.
That's awesome. And so the resilience portion is in that BA.
Yep, absolutely. So the exercise portion of that is foundational, and that's the next step. So
That's incredible. Well, thank you again. So appreciate
absolutely,
you being here. Yeah.
you bet.
Continuing Education Workforce Training CEWT is comprised of professionals dedicated to serving your educational needs. We understand that when it comes to your future, it's all about you. Because our staff and faculty have real-world experience actually doing what they teach, our students obtain the skills and knowledge they are looking for to be competitive in today's marketplace. For more information, please visit our website, cetrain.isu.edu. That is cetrain.isu.edu. Or call us at 208-282-3372.
So, quick synopsis of resilience.
Yes. So.
Okay. Do you want to take some of this?
I'm taking
Oh,
it out.
okay.
Okay, yeah. So yeah. Resilience. Basically, once we have an understanding, and I believe that an understanding of what is going on for people is huge. Every time I would talk with my students about what was going on, and I would explain to them ACEs, and some of them would just sob because they would, first time in their life, have an understanding of what's going on in their brain, and that it's not necessarily their fault. There's something literally that happened to them that's caused them to be who they are and what they are, and now we can work towards fixing that, right? Believe it or not, exercise, back in 2007, I believe, was the first time they ever saw neurogenesis in the brain under a microscope. Before that, it was, once again, heresy to believe that we got new brain cells, right? Well, the way we get new brain cells is from something called brain-derived neurotropic factor. Brain-derived neurotropic factor is the spark. That is what creates the new cells, right? It is increased by exercise, by getting your heart rate for females up from 65, 75% of max, and for males, 80 to 85% of max. And when you add difficult movements in there, whether you're learning yoga or whether you're learning karate, and you get your heart rate up at the same time, you actually have another 38% increase in this brain-derived neurotropic factor to create neurogenesis. This creates new neural networks, and learning new motor pathways helps connect the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex, which, if you understand the way that the brain works, the amygdala is where our fight or flight takes place. The prefrontal cortex is what tells our amygdala to chill out, right? And and when we exercise and move, we're creating new neural pathways between those, okay? Once we have those pathways, our brain will hijack those new pathways to help us learn. And so that's why a pianist is better at math, because the brain actually uses those same neural pathways that it took to learn these complex motor movements, okay, for math problems as well, right? So the same thing happens when we go out and we run, and when we rock climb, and when we do yoga and we tai chi, whatever it is, and we get our heart rate up at the same time, then we have all this new growth in the brain. So our brain literally changes shape, and the damage that was done in our youth can be reversed by exercise. It's actually been proven in multiple studies that exercise is more beneficial than the SSRI inhibitors that we have available for people with anxiety and depression. And when those drugs are stopped and exercise is stopped, the drug benefits go away almost immediately. The exercise groups will see benefits for over a year after the exercise is stopped. Well, why is that? Because there's new neural pathways. We've actually changed the brain, right?
So do you, when you say that the heart rate goes up, has to be what, 65? 75?
Yeah, so 70% of max is where you want to be for females.
How long?
For 30 to 45 minutes.
Okay.
And in tests that they did with rats, of course, because they couldn't biopsy the brains of children.
Probably a good
So in the tests that they did with the rats, they found that the longer the rats ran, the higher concentration of BDNF in the brain, and the more often that they ran, the higher concentration. And then when they taught the rats skills and had them perform obstacle courses, they would learn incredibly faster than the counterparts who did not have access to running wheels and in these tests. So it's fascinating. Exercise is, once again, if it was a pill, everybody would want it. And the funny thing is that if it was a pill and I gave it to you and I said, this will fix everything that is wrong with you. All you have to do is take this pill. But before you take this pill, you have to run on a treadmill for 30 minutes. Otherwise the pill doesn't work. You'd probably take it, even if it was a stinking sugar pill, and you'd probably do the exercise because you're taking a stinking pill. But if I tell you got to go run on a treadmill for 30 minutes, you're never going to do it. Right? Right?
So my question is so you know that exercise then helps with those ACEs.
Yep.
But is there do they have to do other things along with it to help them to dig down to the depth of that, to like?
Obviously, there's, I don't want to oversimplify this. I mean, people who have had severe traumatic experiences in growing up, and my wife, unfortunately, she allows me to speak about these things and her experiences. Obviously, she's currently, now that we've figured out what's probably going on and started to watch it, when her stress level goes up, her pain is actually magnified. And we've noticed that now that we know that that's probably what's causing it, is that these are psychosomatic manifestations, right? And so, she's going through cognitive behavioral therapy right now, and we're probably going to go through some EMDR and eye movement desensitization, realignment, as well for her, to help her put some of this stuff in its proper place in its brain so that it functions properly. Because even though people can be incredibly resilient and understand that there are people who have horrible childhood experiences, who have completely different outcomes, who don't become alcoholics, who don't become drug addicts, who don't become abusers, who don't have a lot of the problems that we see, their health outcomes don't change. They still have the same health outcomes. People who are incredibly resilient still have horrible health outcomes when it comes to the stress, because the HPA axis, which is turned on by the amygdala when we are in fight or flight. These people constantly see bears everywhere. When we see a bear in the woods and it raises up and scares us, it's a really, really good thing. All of the things that happen when our adrenaline and our heart rate goes up, right? These are good things to happen. But when that happens every single day, all day long, and you're constantly drowning in cortisol, and you're constantly drowning in adrenaline, and you're constantly drowning in epinephrine and norepinephrine. It's like you've got the brakes on and the gas pedal on, just floored all the time, and you see disassociation, you see all of these things, and the brain cannot function properly. In fact, the cortisol, massive amounts of cortisol literally erode neural networks, and you'll actually see shrinkage of the dendrites in the brain when it's drowning in the cortisol. So, and exercise, combats all this stuff. And so but that doesn't change the fact that, you're still going to probably have to go see a mental health counselor, which we're working hard right now to change, the stigma related to that, because understand, even as a police officer, and working for the sheriff's department, we see some horrific things, and for years there were stigmas, it's, you're a tough guy, you just put it in the box it belongs in and store it away and you're good to go, Well, there's a reason why most police officers die within 5 years of retirement, because they're struggling with this garbage that's going on in their brain and never figured out how to properly deal with it. And so we deal with that stuff now in specific ways that help us to put that stuff in perspective so that it's not eating us alive for the rest of our life, so, yeah.
Incredible. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Absolutely. No, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, thank you.
It's one of these cases where our 20-minute format.
Yeah, no.